was going to record. I'm going to try to break new ground in this interview, so if I ask you a question that you feel has been best being answered by something you've written previously, just say, I covered that in a forward column titled XYZ or chapter 2 of my third book or something like that. So I may be coming a little bit out of left field sometimes, but I just don't want to repeat everything you've already done.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Was the experience of writing your books pretty much similar, or was the experience of writing Shattered Tablets different in any way from your other books?
Well, I had to write a little bit faster, so with my Abraham book, The Discovery of God, there was a lot. I did a lot more research, and I took longer than I really had time for. So unfortunately, I'm kind of I write books on scholarly topics, but I'm really just a journalist. So I had to realize that I couldn't do the kind of research that a real scholar would do on any of these subjects, and I had to operate more like the journalist that I am. And so in that sense, I did it faster, and I hope that doesn't show too much.
Was it easier or harder than previous books? Was writing this book easier or harder than previous books, or pretty much the same?
Well, it was harder in that I think there are more new insights, and I'm not a rabbi, so I could be wrong about all of them. But with the Abraham book, I was basically drawing on Midrashim and rabbinic traditions, and just basically, my creative work was mainly just to tie them all up into a narrative. And with the Jesus book, I was relying again on a lot of scholarly research that had been done before me, and drawing together Jewish sources that hadn't that people were not familiar with. And again, the creative work was mainly in drawing together into a narrative. And here, in trying to correlate the commandments on the first tablet with ones on the second, I had to take some creative stabs at what the connections are, because they're not really specified in a satisfying way in the traditional sources. I mean, Rashi, in his commentary on the Song of Songs, one particular verse where he talks about this correlation between the first and the sixth commandment, and the second and the seventh, he sort of hints at different ways that they could be correlated, because we know that they are correlated from the Chilta, but he's fairly sketchy about it, so I had to sort of use my intuition about what the connections are, and that was sort of uncharted territory for me.
What have been the most interesting reactions you've received to your book?
Well, it sort of has just started, so there hasn't been a whole lot. It came out just last week, so.
What about when people ask you what are you working on, and you mentioned a book on the Ten Commandments? Any interesting reactions?
The book the title that I get the most reaction to, and this is not going to be the title of the next book, but my next book was going to be called Why God is a Republican. And every time I mention that, people would laugh. You didn't laugh.
Right.
That's okay.
No, you already told me about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it seemed like every time I mention that, people go, that's, and now I can't use that title, because the organization that I work for is a nonprofit. We can't be partisan. So even even though the title was meant to be humorous and provocative, still, we can't be partisan, so I can't use that title, which I kind of regret. So now it's going to be called How Would God Vote? But the title that for Shadow Tablets, I was never 100% sure that was the best title, so that's one that I could come up with.
Well, what are your strengths and weaknesses as a writer?
Strengths, I think that I write fast, and I think I take risks that some people would be reluctant to take, and maybe that's just my naivete, and I'm sometimes surprised when people take great offense at things that I wrote, and to me it seemed to be offensive about that. But so yeah, I guess I tread places where other people might hesitate to tread, and that could be a strength or a weakness. As far as a weakness, I guess I'm writing about things that normally like I said, that a scholar should be writing about, and I'm not a scholar. I'm a journalist, so there's always the danger of my being superficial or wrong or out of left field, and I would play on those things, but there's certainly a risk.
If you were offered $1 million book contract, but with the proviso you couldn't criticize liberalism or secularism, what would you write about?
What the proviso that I can criticize either or?
You could not criticize either liberalism nor secularism, but you're going to be given $1 million to write a book. What would you write on it?
I would write a novel. I would, if I had $1 million, it would give me a certain amount of breathing space psychologically, and I'd love to be able to write about Judaism in the form of a story, and I've not yet done that. I don't know if somebody gave me $1 million, it would sort of clear my head. I think I might be able to do that.
Anything in particular that you'd like to explore in writing a novel about Judaism?
I do have a couple of ideas, but I wouldn't make it boy.
Right, of course. What do you love about Seattle's culture?
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful place. It's gentle in many ways. You point out that it's very secular. And you query, why do I live here instead of Jerusalem? And you speculate, maybe I like secularism more than I admit. And there might be an element of truth to that. Certainly being in a religious culture, sort of a hothouse kind of environment, everyone's looking at you, and there's a lot, we choose to live within the context of Seattle. We live in a suburb where there's a small shul, as opposed to the main Jewish neighborhood, which is called Seward Park, where there are 3 large Orthodox synagogues, and we chose not to live there. In part because it is a little bit of a hothouse, and everyone notices what you do, what you don't do, and it's a little bit easier. Where we live, there's a lot more secular Jews. I guess it is. You're right. It is inconsistent of me. Why do I choose to live in such a secular area?